A GOP lawmaker does not hold his punches when it comes to Nancy Pelosi and how she belongs in jail in this fiery speech. You guys have got to check this out.
Before the sham investigation even started, Speaker Pelosi blocked me and Jim Jordan from investigating January 6th. She discredited the sham committee before it even started. So you have to ask the question, why would she do that? Because it isn't only a partisan witch hunt. It's an attempt that we now know, based on reports over the weekend, that the committee is being used to advance the radical Democrat agenda that includes abolishing the Electoral College. But it's also a cover-up. Speaker Pelosi blocked us because she's afraid of what a real investigation would uncover. She doesn't want Americans to find out what really happened on January 6th and leading up to it. And she doesn't want anyone asking questions about her role and her responsibilities in securing the United States Capitol. That's why the committee is refusing to answer basic questions about January 6th. In fact, blocking these questions from even being asked. Questions that must be answered to keep the Capitol safe and to prevent another riot or incident like January 6th from ever happening again in the future. What questions am I talking about? First of all, Capitol police officers, we now know, were half-staffed on January 6th because of COVID. How is that? 2, why were our Capitol police officers under-equipped? Why were some officers forced to face down a riot with either expired helmets or no helmets at all? 3, why was the United States Capitol Police never trained to deal with riots after all of the riots that were going on in the summer of 2020? 4, did Speaker Pelosi communicate with the House Sergeant at Arms on January 6th or in the days leading up to the riot? 5, was Speaker Pelosi involved in the decision to delay the National Guard assistance on January 6th? 6, why didn't the Capitol Police Intelligence Unit raised the alarm about potential violence when they had evidence and intelligence for weeks leading up to January 6th that something violent could happen at the Capitol that day? 7, why did the FBI deploy commandos to Quantico on January 3rd with shoot-to-kill authority but fail to send the U.S. Capitol Police a single threat assessment or intelligence bulletin? 8, why did the House Sergeant at Arms refuse to cooperate with the Senate Homeland Security's bipartisan January 6th investigation? Those are just some of the questions that Jim Jordan and I were prepared to ask if we were able to participate in this investigation and in these hearings. But Nancy Pelosi blocked us from the committee because she knows that those questions leave a trail of breadcrumbs right back to the Speaker's office. Today in my hometown in Columbia City, my constituents are paying $5.25 for a gallon of gas. There hasn't been a single committee hearing on Capitol Hill about rising gas prices, let alone one in prime time for all of the American people to see. But the American people are sick and tired of what they're getting out of this Pelosi and Democrat-led Congress. They're tired of the theatrics. They want their congressmen and women to focus on the issues that matter most to them, but instead this is what we're left up to. It's a shame, and I believe that it will backfire big time on these Democrats as we near the election to come.
Just for the record, this hearing is not being done in isolation. It's been carefully coordinated with the House Armed Services Committee, and not only has their blessing, but a bipartisan blessing to hold this hearing. Also, without objection, I'd like to submit for the record Secretary Miller's transcribed interview under oath to the Select Committee on January 6th. 2 excerpts. So, Mr. Miller, did you try to read, well, let me back up. On January 3rd, did you have, or even prior, did you have all the authorities needed in terms of activating, deploying the D.C. National Guard? And he said, yes, I felt I did. Did you need any additional authorities, or was there a discussion about your authorities in any way at the January 3rd meeting? No, I didn't. I felt like I had all the authorities I needed and did not need to discuss anything with the president regarding authorities. Another question. So, Mr. Miller, did you try to reach President Trump that day? I did not. Why not? I had all the authorities I needed to perform my duties, responsibilities that day. and didn't need any other guidance from the president.
I mean,
now
that makes it
recognize
cut and
the
dry
general.
right there. President Donald Trump was there, and he was willing to go over the top for security on that day. He even offered 10,000 National Guard troops, and it was in writing, yet Nancy Pelosi rejected it and thought it was way too overblown, and he was crazy for even thinking that security would be an issue. But it just makes me wonder, some part of me feels that the Democrats wanted this to happen. They wanted to discredit the MAGA movement, because think about it, once that happens, anybody who was outwardly supporting Donald Trump, you were called an insurrectionist. It completely killed the MAGA movement for a good period of time, because instead of actually talking about what happened in the 2020 election and all the election irregularities that there were, everybody's entire attention was focused on the January 6th insurrection and how our democracy was almost overthrown. If you think about it, it was kind of a genius play by them because it completely took everybody's mind off of the subject at hand. It was a very evil, manipulative tactic. Unfortunately, many Americans were deceived by these pathological liars in D.C.
Mr. Chairman, by submitting for the record the Army timeline of events from December 31st, 2020, through January 7, 2021, that report dated January 7, 2021.
Without objection.
I find some of the comments this morning interesting because I too was on the floor that day, and I find it interesting because there's an allegation that the commander-in-chief has to call everybody who's in the chain of command to make sure his orders are followed. It is my understanding, and I believe that the evidence today will show from these gentlemen who have given their time and are whistleblowers, meaning they're coming forward with something that other people may not want to have heard, that we will discover through their testimony that in fact the president had given the instruction, perhaps misunderstood on January 3rd, but certainly on January 6th, prior to that instruction being relayed by his officers in accordance with the general military procedure to the D.C. National Guard. And that's a big part of what this hearing will be about today. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind. Further, we've heard a lot about the attempts to rewrite history because the January 6th committee is allegedly supposed to have already done all of this. But we will hear, I believe, from these gentlemen today that they were not talked to by the January 6th Commission. And further, that commission will forever in history be tainted because it was the first time in history, in an attempt to write the history after the fact, that both sides, both major parties in this political situation that we have found ourselves in for the last 175, 200 years, both were not invited to participate in an equal manner. That the Republican representatives who were supposed to be on that, who was originally set up, were supposed to be a part of the January 6th committee, were not allowed to be present. They were not allowed to cross-examine witnesses. They were not allowed to ask for witnesses like these four brave gentlemen who are here with us today. They weren't allowed to call those witnesses to appear in front of the January 6th committee. So while the January 6th committee may have found some very interesting information, they intentionally chose not to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. At the very best, it can be described as a partial attempt to put forward facts that favored their side of the narrative and not to get to all the facts. And as Jack Webb and his famous character from Dragnet used to say, the facts. We just want the facts, ma'am. That's what we're here to do today, is to try to make sure that we're getting to the facts, not the political rhetoric, not the emotions per se, but the facts from four brave gentlemen who serve our nation and have served our nation, who have come forward. I don't know any of these gentlemen. I don't believe any of them has a political axe to grind. They are here just to deliver the facts. I yield back. Now recognize Dr. Murphy for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if I'm a little out of breath. It's just being old. Thank you all for coming forward. It takes absolute courage. Absolute courage. Every damn meeting we have now has Trump derangement syndrome talking to it. This was a dereliction of duty by the Secretary of the Army, who refused, by the way, to come before this committee because he knew his culpability. He knew that he lied and he was derelict in the duty. And I appreciate from the bottom of my heart you guys standing up for the United States of America. You took an oath to it, as did the Secretary, and you're keeping your oath. So I deeply appreciate it at your own personal cost, because we know the weaponization of this government is occurring at an exponential rate. And it is just proof in the pudding that this is what we're dealing with. I swear, why do we not have bipartisan support in getting to the bottom of this is beyond me. It's everything about Trump. Captain Nick, you know, the summer before in 2020, when there was an absolute disaster in this country where riots and burning of federal buildings occur, we saw billions of dollars, multiple deaths occur. Speaker Pelosi, I believe, is culpable with part of this in allowing this, paving the way for the terrible thing to happen on January 6th, to just dismiss America's memory of what happened the summer before.
The thing about Trump derangement syndrome, though, is that Trump is only protecting the American people. He's only standing up and doing common sense things that the American people agree with. He's standing up for us. I mean, look at what happened. Look what Elon Musk exposed with USAID. The billions and trillions of dollars that America was just sending away, and a lot of the money was probably just being laundered back into our politicians' pockets. So obviously, these people are going to have a vested interest in trying to destroy Donald Trump and everything he stands for. A good way to determine whether a politician is actually for America and for us, or whether they're just part of the swamp, is to check out their yearly salary and compare that to their net worth. The Mitch McConnells, Nancy Pelosi's of the world, they don't have $100 million in net worth just by their outstanding job in Congress, because they're earning $100,000 to $200,000 a year. They would have to work for, 300 years to never pay a dime in tax, never pay a dime in food, shelter, water. It's simply unattainable to achieve unless they were doing shady stuff in the background. That's exactly what they have been doing, so they need to be brought to justice.
Capitol on January 6th, which we know were all wrong. There was no hesitation in creating a politicized community. And we had a former Republican who saw it as a personal grind to go after President Trump, basically not allowing evidence to come before the committee. It's been more than 3 years, and members of the D.C. National Guard are coming forward with your oath to provide clarity. I'll just ask Captain Nick, in your testimony, you mentioned you were a confidential source for the Select Committee. In addition, you go on to state my confidentiality was breached to the national media. Would you mind expanding upon that?
Yes, sir. First, I'd like to correct a record from a previous statement from your colleague. When he asked a question about Pentagon officials and their desire to send troops, I said absolutely. I meant they did not at the time want to send troops to the Capitol, just for clarification. I was informally, after January 6th, at some time after, I was informally interviewed by the Select Committee on January 6th. I gave informal testimony and hired counsel from Tully Rickney, Dan Meyer, who's also behind me. After giving my written notes and informal testimony, a couple weeks later, I was contacted by Political from a news outlet, from a writer requesting comment on my handwritten notes they got a copy of. I then contacted Dan, who then contacted the Select Committee to resolve that. But it had to be leaked at some point from probably the Select Committee, because that's the only people I talked to and gave my notes to.
It is obviously evident with anybody with an objective eye that the committee was put forth to tell one thing. If that committee had gone in front of anything in a legal department, you would have cross-examination, other witnesses, et cetera. We never saw any of that to get to the actual truth, which is what all Americans, whether you're which party or not, should believe in doing. Period. I just want to reiterate something. This is actually, I guess, to Colonel Matthews and General Dean. Turning to the matter of security, Secretary of the Army and McCarthy have said the D.C. National Guard was not prepared for immediate deployment. Do you agree with that statement?
That statement is false. We were prepared in many ways. We even had backup plans. We call them branches and sequels, right? So not only did we have a force that was at Andrews Air Force Base that was training and doing civil disturbance that weekend, prepared to deploy on that day, that was ready to deploy on that day, we also had traffic control points that were at MPD, and those members had riot control gear in the trunk, not visible to the public, but for their self-protection. In case MPD had to respond, they had the appropriate gear to provide civil disturbance, riot control efforts if needed. And so we had the capability, we had the planning, we had the know-how. So the question that I have is, so out of all the events, out of all the inaugurations the District of Columbia National Guard supported, out of all the NATO summits, out of all the IMF protests that we've had, the summer of 2020, COVID, we were not able to respond to this. We're incapable. That's categorically false.
I find it just, my time is short, but I just find it a slap in the face to all the good men and women who serve in our armed forces to say you're not prepared. A slap in the face. And because this guy wanted to save his butt with the hope of getting in the Biden administration, that's point blank what happened.
72% of Americans under Biden's administration did not trust the CIA, FBI, NSA, all the three-letter organizations because they just lie all the time. It seems they're always withholding the truth. Anything that they say is a lie and you just have to believe the opposite. The audacity to try and put the blame on the military to say they were not prepared to come on January 6th is such a disgusting and despicable act that I didn't even think they were capable of doing, because if our politicians had any shred of honor, they would own up to the fact, you know what, we had the option, we did not do it, it's on us. It will not happen again. But instead, we have to deal with sleazy, slimy politicians always trying to throw someone else under the bus and never take full accountability for your actions. Nancy Pelosi and anyone that was a part of that January 6th committee needs to have their day in court. Isn't it so funny how the Biden DOJ was attacking Trump, parents speaking out at board meetings, grandmas who were there on January 6th and just walked through the velvet ropes of the Capitol, yet the crime rate in this country was going up at an exponential rate? These people don't care about preserving American values, keeping us safe and secure. They're only trying to pursue a political agenda. Nancy Pelosi is wicked to the core. And it's not just her. There is a whole establishment and swamp of people just like her. Because if we get rid of Pelosi, someone else is going to come up in her place. We need to remove these people from Washington, D.C. from the core. If you serve in Washington, D.C., you better have the best interests of Americans and not enrich yourself at the behest of Americans. Because that is exactly what has been happening for far too long. Nancy Pelosi set up January 6th to discredit the America First MAGA movement, and so the people are distracted and stop talking the corruption that happened on November 4th, 2020. And as each day passes, I believe more and more people are starting to wake up to the fact maybe 2020 was not exactly what we were told. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this down below. Why do you think January 6th happened? And do you think Nancy Pelosi and a lot of these prominent Democrats wanted it to happen? Let me know. I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you enjoyed, make sure to smash out like, comment, subscribe, and wish you guys nothing but the best. Till next time.